In an era of ancient prophets and unexplored lands lived a man of unparalleled faith and conviction. Abraham. He, a man distinguished by his devotion and submission to Allah, carried in his heart a deep and sincere desire, a desire blessed by the heavens. This is the story of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, a tale that has resonated through the centuries, imparting lessons of faith, patience, and divine surrender. This narrative, based on the teachings and verses of the Quran, takes us through the sands of time to uncover the story of Ishmael, a tale of survival, faith, and eternal commitment. A tale that not only illustrates the strength of the human spirit, but also underscores the importance of obedience and submission to the divine will. Abraham, known for his tireless pursuit of truth and his rejection of the idolatries of his time, was chosen by Allah for a great purpose. His life, marked by trials and revelations, was illuminated with the promise of a son and heir to his lineage and his faith. In the sacred pages of the Quran, it is narrated how Abraham, facing the sterility of his wife Sarah, entrusted himself to Allah with hope and patience. In response to his prayers, he was granted a son from his servant Hagar, Ishmael. When Hagar, the Egyptian servant of Sarah, Abraham's wife, became pregnant, the miracle of the promise began to take shape. The news of the pregnancy brought with it a flood of emotions: gratitude for divine mercy, wonder at the realization of a long-awaited hope, and deep reflection on the trials this new being would face. Abraham, aware of the weight of responsibility, prepared to guide his son on the path of truth and devotion. The birth of Ishmael was a moment of incomparable jubilation. Abraham, filled with gratitude, saw in his son the materialization of the divine promise, a clear sign of the benevolence and power of Allah. Ishmael, from his earliest days, showed himself to be a child of special character, destined to play a crucial role in the history of monotheistic faith. The days passed, and Ishmael grew under the love and tutelage of his father. Abraham, ever devout, taught his son about the oneness of Allah and the importance of submission to his will. Together, father and son, they laid the foundation of a relationship that transcended the earthly, forged in faith and love for Allah. Ishmael's life took an unexpected turn when, by divine mandate, Abraham had to take Hagar and Ishmael away to the desert of Paran. This act of obedience was a test for both Abraham and Hagar and Ishmael. Leaving behind their home and security, they embarked on a journey into the unknown, fully trusting in Allah's providence. Once in the desert, Abraham left Hagar and Ishmael with a small amount of provisions, and with a heavy heart departed. Hagar, facing the adversity of the desert, tirelessly struggled to care for her son. In her desperation to find water for Ishmael, who was suffering from thirst, Hagar ran between the hills of Safa and Marwa seeking help. In her anguish and effort, Allah, in His infinite mercy, caused water to gush forth from the Zamzam well, a miracle that saved the lives of Ishmael and his mother, and which is remembered by millions of Muslims during the Hajj pilgrimage to this day. The miracle of the Zamzam water was not only a display of Allah's mercy, but also a sign of Ishmael's special position in the divine plan. Ishmael grew up in the desert, becoming a strong, resilient young man deeply aware of his connection with Allah. His life in the arid and challenging desert environment molded him into a man of great character, preparing him for the leadership and spiritual guidance roles he would assume in the future. Life in the desert also provided Ishmael with the opportunity to interact with the nomadic tribes of the region. Through these interactions, Ishmael became a respected member of the community, known for his wisdom, righteousness, and devotion to Allah. He married a woman from the Jurhum tribe, thereby strengthening his bond with the desert people and securing his place in the region's history. Under Allah's guidance and blessing, Ishmael thrived in the desert. He became a living example of faith and submission, inspiring those around him. His life was a constant testimony to Allah's goodness and providence, a reminder that even in the most difficult times, faith and trust in Allah can open paths of hope and salvation. Meanwhile, Abraham, far from his son, continued his divine mission, but always kept Ishmael in his prayers. Years later, Allah ordered Abraham to return to the desert to reunite with Ishmael. This reunion, filled with emotions and significance, marked the beginning of a new phase in Ishmael's life. Father and son, united once again, would share a task that would become a fundamental pillar of Islam. During this reunion, Abraham and Ishmael received the divine order to build the Kaaba, an act that would symbolize submission to Allah and serve as a pilgrimage center for believers. The construction of the Kaaba was a task that required not only physical effort, but also a deep spiritual connection. Together, father and son laid the stones, each one a symbol of faith and devotion to Allah. Ishmael, assisting his father in this sacred task, demonstrated his commitment to his father's mission and his own devotion to Allah. The construction of the Kaaba was not just the creation of a place of worship. It was an act that unified the tribes of the region and established Ishmael as a spiritual leader and a pillar in the history of the Islamic faith. The Kaaba became a symbol of monotheistic unity, a place where Muslims direct their prayers and perform the Hajj, the pilgrimage that commemorates the acts of faith of Abraham, Agar, and Ishmael. Throughout his life in the desert, Ishmael faced numerous trials, each one strengthening his faith and character. His life is an example of perseverance, submission, and trust in Allah. The way he overcame difficulties and remained steadfast in his faith is a source of inspiration for believers. Ishmael's story in the desert, his survival, and success highlight the importance of trust in Allah and the willingness to face trials with faith and determination. Ishmael's legacy extended beyond his life in the desert. He married and had descendants, ensuring the continuation of the line of prophets that began with Abraham. His marriage and family life also reflect his commitment to the continuity of faith and the building of a community based on principles of justice and devotion to Allah. Through his life and actions, Ishmael established a model of behavior and faith for future generations. His story, deeply rooted in the Quran, remains relevant in the contemporary world, offering lessons of resilience, faith, and unconditional submission to the will of Allah. His life in the desert, marked by miracle, survival, and the construction of the Kaaba, is a testimony to Allah's mercy and guidance, and a reminder that even in the most challenging moments, faith and trust in Allah can open paths of hope and salvation. The narrative of Ishmael's sacrifice is one of the most significant and moving episodes in the lives of Abraham and Ishmael, and it is fundamental in Islamic teachings. This event not only tests the devotion and obedience of Abraham, but also reveals the depth of faith and submission of Ishmael to the will of Allah. After establishing his family in the desert and fulfilling the construction of the Kaaba, Abraham faced a divine trial that would challenge the very core of his faith. In a series of visions, he was ordered to sacrifice his beloved son Ishmael as an act of obedience to Allah. These visions, far from being mere dreams, were divine revelations that required a profound and sincere response. The Qur'anic narrative describes how Abraham, distressed but resigned to fulfill the will of Allah, shared the vision with Ishmael. In an act of faith and courage that reflects the depth of his upbringing and his trust in Allah, Ishmael not only accepted his father's decision, but also encouraged him to fulfill the divine order. This exchange between father and son is a moment of extraordinary submission and devotion, highlighting Ishmael's exceptional character as a young man of great faith and spiritual strength. With heavy hearts but firm in their faith, Abraham and Ishmael journeyed to the designated place for the sacrifice. This journey was not just a physical displacement, but a path of deep reflection and total surrender to the will of Allah. Upon arrival, Abraham prepared Ishmael for the sacrifice. In that supreme moment, when all seemed lost and the act of obedience was about to be fulfilled, the mercy and providence of Allah manifested. An angel sent by Allah stopped Abraham, revealing that his willingness to sacrifice his son had been a test of his faith. Instead of Ishmael, a ram was provided for sacrifice, thus symbolizing that Abraham's submission and obedience were sufficient. This deeply symbolic event represents the willingness to sacrifice the most beloved in order to fulfill the divine will. Ishmael's sacrifice, or more precisely, the willingness to sacrifice him, has become a central point in Islamic understanding of sacrifice and submission to Allah. This act not only strengthened the faith of Abraham and Ishmael, but also established itself as a model of obedience and devotion for all believers. Every year, during the celebration of Eid al-Adha, Muslims around the world commemorate this event, remembering the importance of faith, sacrifice, and submission to the will of Allah. The story of the sacrifice is also a demonstration of Allah's love and mercy towards His faithful servants. Through this trial, Allah not only tested the faith of Abraham and Ishmael, but also bestowed upon them a blessing and a lesson that would resonate through generations. The divine intervention at the last moment is a reminder that, although trials may seem overwhelming, faith in Allah can provide a way out and a solution. Ishmael continued to live in the desert of Paran, in the region that would later be known as Mecca. Here, his life intertwined with the nomadic tribes of the area, and through his interactions and marriage to a woman from the Jurhum tribe, Ishmael became an influential and respected figure. His just and wise character, forged by trials and the teachings of his father, made him a natural leader among his people. One of the highlights of Ishmael's life was the reconstruction of the Kaaba alongside his father Abraham. This sacred act, which had begun as a divine directive, became a center of worship and a symbol of monotheistic unity. The Kaaba, originally built by Adam, was restored by Abraham and Ishmael as a place dedicated to the worship of the one true Allah. This reconstruction not only reaffirmed Ishmael's position as an important patriarch, but also solidified Mecca as a significant spiritual center. Ishmael's commitment to teaching and spreading monotheistic faith was a key aspect of his life. Following his father's example, he dedicated his life to guiding his people towards the worship of one Allah, rejecting the idolatrous practices prevalent in the region. His influence and teachings laid the groundwork for what would eventually become the Islamic community. Ishmael is revered in Islam not only as the son of Abraham, but also as a prophet and messenger of Allah. His life is an example of patience, perseverance, and complete submission to the will of Allah. Through his trials and experiences, Ishmael demonstrated unwavering faith and profound trust in divine guidance. His story teaches the importance of maintaining faith even in the most challenging times and always being ready to obey the will of Allah. Ishmael's marriage and descendants also play an important role in his legacy. Through his union with a woman from the Jurhum tribe, Ishmael ensured the continuity of his lineage. His descendants multiplied, and through them, Abraham's monotheistic teaching was perpetuated and spread throughout the region. Ishmael is recognized as the ancestor of many Arabs, and his lineage holds special significance in Islamic history. Ishmael's life in Mecca and his contribution to the construction and establishment of the Kaaba make him a key figure in Islamic history and tradition. His example of life, marked by submission to Allah and commitment to teaching the faith, continues to inspire millions of Muslims worldwide. The commemoration of his deeds during the Hajj, particularly the practice of sa'i between Safa and Marwa, is a constant reminder of the strength and faith of his mother Hagar, as well as of Allah's mercy and providence. Ishmael, as a patriarch, prophet, and leader, represents the culmination of the promise made to Abraham by Allah. His life and legacy are fundamental in understanding the development of monotheism and the formation of Islamic identity. Through the story of Ishmael, Muslims find a model of devotion, patience, and unwavering faith, and his story remains a source of inspiration and guidance for all believers. Ishmael's story, deeply rooted in the Quran, is more than a tale from the past. It is a source of wisdom and guidance for believers of all times. His life, marked by faith, patience, and submission to the will of Allah, offers valuable lessons for contemporary Muslims.